Last night, you guys got to hear from our speaker, Hannah. I thought she did an incredible job last night. Hannah, wherever you are, I just want you to know that God used you. And she talked about how God gives us this invitation, that God actually bridges the gap before we do it. And I'll tell you, I am still just not getting over the idea of how good God is to come and close that gap between us. I never get over it. I'm still not over it. I hope you aren't over it. I hope you aren't over how good God is to you. And last night, I just got to see how good God is. We had so many people for the first time say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I am in. We had hundreds more say, I am in. Can we give God praise on a Monday morning? It may be Monday, but God is moving. God is not sleeping. God is doing something incredible. And today I want to build on things. Jesus gives you an invitation. Just like he showed up at the woman at the well, he gave her an invitation into relationship with him. He does the same with you, and the question I have, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with the invitation that Jesus is putting out and giving to you right now? You know, I want you to know, Jesus didn't get this far to go and have you say yes and say, gotcha, now I got a bunch of rules for you. He would have written a very different story if that's what his goal was. It would have looked completely different. If God cared about you following a bunch of rules, do you know what he would have sent? A vice principal. Because you know what? The vice principal's office is what I was always in. They were all about the rules. They were all about making us follow the rules. And when we broke the rules, they were all about punishing us. But God didn't do that. Nor did God send a rule book to try to be like, you're good enough or you're not good enough. God sent a person. And that's why you and I get to know he wants a relationship with you and me. And today we're going to learn about what that looks like. And that person that he sent, his name is Jesus, but he was known as the Good Shepherd. Not just any shepherd, but he was known as the Good Shepherd. And so when Jesus invites you into relationship, what do? How do you find your purpose in that? I have a story that's helpful for you. I don't know if you've heard this. A young man invited his friend to go to a church service. And so the young man, he had been partying all night. He had actually gotten high the night before. He was still high. And he goes to this church service and he sits through the sermon. And he gets to the end. He says, I'm going to talk to that pastor. So a young guy goes up to the pastor. He says, Pastor, I have a question for you. He says, go ahead. He says, do I have to stop smoking weed if I start following Jesus? And the pastor looks at him and he says, no. Now, some of you are like, what kind of church is this? I like this church. All right. He says, okay, Pastor, if I start following Jesus, do I have to stop smoking marijuana? And the pastor looks at him. He says, no. He pulls out of his jacket. He pulls this blunt that Snoop Dogg would have been proud of, and he looks at the pastor. He says, do I have to give up this if I start following Jesus? And the pastor looks at him and he says, no, you don't. And the young man looks at him and he says, I don't get it. And the pastor says, you're right, you don't get it. He says, I have a question for you. Do you have to get yourself cleaned up to take a shower? The young man looks at him and he says, well, no, you take a shower and that's what cleans you up. And the pastor says, exactly, and that's how it is with Jesus. That's how it is with Jesus. He says, you don't get yourself cleaned up to go to Jesus. You know what you do? You go to him, and he builds a relationship with you. He's going to speak things to you. He's going to convict you of things. He's going to help you understand some things that might want to change, and then you're going to want to change them, and then you get to do it together. That's who Jesus is. That is who Jesus is. And so today, so many of us, we haven't understood the Good Shepherd. We haven't understood how he operates. And my prayer, my hope today is we're going to walk away understanding it, because culture tells you and me it's about what you and I do. And if we get to the right place, then suddenly we're worth looking at in God's eyes. But God says, no, I don't look at it that way. I look at it a totally different way. I don't look at what you do. I look at whether you are willing to follow me. You need to put your life in the hands of somebody that's actually worth following. You are a terrible leader for your life, and you need to put your life into the hands of somebody that's worth following, and the only one that is worth following is the one that's known as the Good Shepherd. He's worthy to follow. He's faithful to follow. He wants to take you to new places. That's why he's called the Good Shepherd. And some of you already know this Good Shepherd, he doesn't care what college degree you have or don't have in your life. He doesn't care if you've read through the whole Bible and memorized it 10 times. Those are good things to do. This Good Shepherd is looking for one thing. If you want to find your purpose, he's saying, then just follow me. Because if you do that, you will find your purpose every single time. And today, I want to help us do that. Yesterday, we got to hear about the woman at the well. It was in the book of John, one of the biographies of Jesus. We're going to look at something that's in that same book. It's just a little bit further down the road in the story. It's in John chapter 10. And if you've ever heard of it, this is where Jesus is known as the Good Shepherd. It gives us insight into who he is. And let me start off saying, we're going to jump in, and today we're going to look at one Bible verse. That's it, just one verse. And I want you to know in this verse, it is so rich, it is so deep, you're going to walk away with an understanding. But first, let me wipe the slate clean. Whatever think you know about shepherds, just dust it off right now. Get rid of it. Whatever it is, shake it out, shake it off. I want you to start from scratch, because here's the first thing you need to know. Shepherds are and shepherds were badasses. Shepherds are and shepherds were badasses. You know, shepherds aren't these pictures of guys white dudes holding cuddly little lambs and petting them the whole time. No. Shepherds were warriors and protectors. Shepherds knew how to get their business done. If crap went down somewhere around this room, you know who I'd want to be around? I'd want to be around a shepherd, because they knew how to protect. They would protect the sheep. You ever heard of David, from the story of David and Goliath? Do you know why David could take him on? He was a shepherd. Shepherds would lay down their lives to protect the sheep, and oftentimes it looked like fighting bears and wolves and lions. And because David had fought all of those things, he knew he could fight Goliath. And I want you to have that picture. That's what a shepherd looked like. A shepherd is a protector who's strong and able, and he's worth putting your life into his hands. And that's who the Good Shepherd wants to be for you today. And the shepherd has a word. I want to read again this just one verse. We're going to look at it. We're going to dig into it. And this is what it says in John chapter 10:27. It says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." We're just going to start off with the first two words, my sheep. My sheep. Now, if Jesus is the Good Shepherd, what does that mean we are? That was a good by the way. That was fantastic. Now, you might hear sheep and feel like that's an insulting thing. Sheep are actually not dumb animals. Sheep are they're pretty smart animals. They'll figure things out, but sheep have one really big problem. They work in packs, but if they don't have a good leader, they will find themselves astray and they will get lost and in trouble. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anybody? We need somebody leading us and taking us to a good place. And shepherds, it's amazing, they were strong and powerful, but they were also gentle and humble. A shepherd would lead about 100 sheep a day. He would lead them to green pastures where they could eat. He would lead them to places called still waters, because sheep get really spooked easily. If something happens, they get spooked and they won't eat or drink. And he would lead them to these places of still water so they could just reach down and get refreshed. And then at the end of the day, the shepherd would lead them to a place called a sheepfold. A sheepfold is a cave in the side of a hill. I've had a chance to see these. And there would be rocks, and there would only be one opening to go into the sheepfold. And you might have up to 10 shepherds that would bring their hundreds of sheep in. They would line them up, and this is a picture of what it looks like. They would line them up in this cave. They would all be pushed into the cave. And then there would be one little door going in. And you know what that shepherd would do? He would lay himself down at the gate. He would lay down the entire night because he was saying, if you're going to get in here, you have to get through me. Just like the Good Shepherd Jesus laid his life down for you. You see, you have to put your life into the hands of somebody that's actually worthy of leading your life. Nobody else will lay down your life for you but Jesus, the Good Shepherd. He lays his life down for you. And as a result, you and I need to listen to what he says. We need to actually act like his sheep that follow him and hear him. And I want to dig in because he gives us 3 ways where you can follow him. If you want to find your purpose, you got to know these 3 things and go after him. We're going to look at it. So let's put that verse back up. John 10:27. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. And I want us to dig into these 3 things. First one, he wants us to listen to his voice. Do you know how to hear his voice? Do you know how to hear it? Do you know how to look out for it? Here's the key insight. The more you know Jesus, the more you'll know his voice. The more you spend time in and around Jesus, the more that you'll know his voice. Now, I want to do a little shout out here. My daughter Lydia is here. She's right over there. Shout out to Lydia. Lydia, I am so proud of you. I love you so much. And you know what's really interesting? In 1,000 students here, it takes me about 2 seconds to find where she is. And do you know why I can just pick her out? Because I know her. Because I love her. Because I'm her dad. I can find her just like that. It doesn't take me anything. I know her silhouette. I know what her voice sounds like. It doesn't take me any time to find her because I know her and I love her. But did you know that God, the same way that I know her and love her, God wants us to actually feel that way to him, where we would know his voice, we would understand it, that we would be able to hear it. With all the voices going on, we would cut through the clutter and be able to just see right where he is at. When a shepherd would come up to his sheep, I told you there might be 1,000 sheep that would be in this sheepfold. It was really interesting because if the wrong shepherd would come up, sheep be hanging out, and wrong shepherd could say, "Hey sheep," and they'd just be like. But as soon as the right shepherd came up, right shepherd could say, "Hey sheep," and all of a sudden, I've seen it. Like the shepherd comes up and they know his voice, and when they hear his voice, they come alive and they listen to it and they start moving. It's time to move. It's time to move. I hear something. God hopes that you would learn how to hear his voice and you would move. This is why you're here. You may not know that our goal is that while we're here at this time, you would learn how to hear his voice, because you're going to leave here and there are going to be a bunch of other voices that are competing for your attention. And we want you to know how to tap into his voice. And there are a few different ways we've been doing that. One, we've been singing these worship songs. We've been singing these songs that just root us into the character of Jesus. They root us into God's heart for us. And we want to do that because God is worthy of our worship. And we also want to do that because we're trying to imprint the language of the Good Shepherd into our hearts. As we hear the goodness of Scripture that are written into these words, we hope that they write onto our hearts so that when we can see something, we can ask ourselves, am I hearing something that's in line with the shepherd's voice, or is this somebody else's voice? It's why we do that. Every morning, I try to just spend some time in the Bible. I do it through an app, and I try to read through a chapter. That's why I read through John 10:20. I'm just reading. I'm like, okay, God, what are you revealing in it? And here's the thing I want you to hear. God doesn't love me anymore because I'm spending time reading my Bible. I get to know his voice more. I get to hear it really clearly and say, yes, that's the voice of the Good Shepherd. That's the voice of the Good Shepherd. You know what we also do? There's a huge reason that you're in a C group with a C group leader. Because we want to surround you with other people that also know how to hear his voice. Because when the sheep hear his voice and go up, I get to look around and be like, oh, you heard his voice, and maybe I didn't, but maybe I need to perk up and hear his voice right now. C group leaders, I want to tell you, you are doing incredibly important work. You are the youth pastors here this week. I want you to know there are eternal consequences, and God is using you as a part of this thing, and I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for every one of you, and if you've been wondering if God is using you, you don't always get to see it in the moment, but I know the Good Shepherd is using you. You're representing his voice. You're representing his voice. Now, you know what you also have to do? You've got to learn how to silence the other voices. I told you you're going to leave here, and there are going to be more voices competing. It's going to be 10 times harder when you get out of camp. And I'm going to tell you, you might need to put some voices on D&D right now. You might need to say, hold up, I need to unsubscribe. You might need to say, hold up, I'm not going to listen to that more, because you've started to feel the freedom of hearing the Good Shepherd's voice, but you're realizing I might go back into an environment where I'm surrounded with the noise of all these other things, and I just want you to learn you might need to shut some other voices out that don't look like the Good Shepherd, so that you can keep the voices that remind you who God is and who you are in that moment. We've got to hear his voice. And the thing that I promise you, the more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you practice hearing, the better you get at it. And I want you to know why it's so important. There's a pastor that said this quote. He said, discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. Everybody can do that. But he said, discernment's knowing the difference between right and almost right. I don't want you to almost hear the voice of God. I don't want you to almost hear the voice of the Good Shepherd. I want you rooted in his voice, because it's the beginning of finding your purpose. Do you know how to hear his voice? Here's the second thing. The Good Shepherd wants to know you. He does know you, but he wants to know you. The Good Shepherd, he wants to know you intimately. Joel said last night, God doesn't just love you, he likes you. Did you know that God knows not only all of your quirks, he also knows all of your sin, and he still leans into you? He still likes you. He still wants to know you. He wants to know you, and you have the opportunity to let him. Do you choose to spend time with him? Or do you just show up when you need something? So that's been an issue I've had for a long time. It's like God makes a terrible genie. He makes a great shepherd. You know, for some of us, maybe it looks like asking a question, do I have a one-way conversation, or do I have a two-way conversation where I get to listen from God? All of us have that friend who we know they are always talking. It's always a one-way conversation. If they're in the room right now, just give them a good elbow. Give them a little reminder like, hey, you got to let some other people talk sometimes. But some of you are looking around like, who is it? Who is it? I'm going to find you. Jesus wants you to lean in. It's a vulnerable thing to let Jesus know you and to let him in on any area of your life. I told you a good shepherd, he would lay down at the front of that gate, and you know what he would do every night? As all those sheep came in, he would go and he would find the little baby sheep. And that picture of a shepherd holding a sheep is partially accurate, because he would find the little sheep and he would actually feel their bones. He would check if anything was broken or misplaced. He would look for cuts on them. He would put ointment on them if they needed it. He would bandage their leg if they needed it. That's how intimate the Good Shepherd wants to know you. When I was in college, I gave access to God to some of my life. I said, God, you can lead some of my life, but there were parts of my life that I didn't trust the Good Shepherd with. And specifically, it was the parts of my life around sexuality. I was dating my girlfriend at the time, and because of my insecurity, I often only felt loved if somebody was physically showing love to me. And so I just said, part of me, God, is off limits to you. And what that looked like is me going outside of what the Good Shepherd says, this is where it's healthy for you. This is where you can just be following me. And I chose to have sex with my girlfriend because we loved each other. I had reasons for it, and I justified it. And I remember just the Good Shepherd work with me and saying, Terry, I don't want part of you. I want all of you. I remember wrestling with him, and God was good to me. He was gentle to me, but he was clear with me. He had good plans for me. I remember finally I got to this point where I said, God, I'm not going to wrestle with you in this. I'm going to trust you in this. And it led to me having one of the most difficult and awkward conversations I ever had to say, we're not going to do this anymore because I believe God has a better plan for me. But it was the first time that I just really started trusting God with all of my life, and I want you to know I was better for it. You are not a good shepherd of your own life. You will lead yourself to places that will take you astray, and I'm so thankful that God didn't give up on me when I messed up. He led me. He took me to a place. God is not happy with part of you. He wants all of you, but he is willing to wait for you. He is willing to wait for you. God wants to know you. There's one last thing. He wants you to hear his voice. He wants to know you. And there's a third thing. Maybe this is one for you. God does want you to follow him. God does want you to take action. But the interesting thing is this intentionally comes last. You know, it's so fascinating. The world will tell you that this is where you start, and you've got to start doing the right things. And if you're a guy, it's like, hey, don't drink, don't chew, don't date the girls that do. And if you get that right, then finally you can get to a good place and be presentable to God. But you need to hear this thing. Doing the right things and avoiding the wrong things is not following the Good Shepherd. Let me say that again for you. Doing the right things and avoiding the wrong things is not following the Good Shepherd. Following the Good Shepherd is following the Good Shepherd. Because God doesn't work that way. Some of us, I'm going to speak to a few of you right now. Some of us, we're carrying some incredible hurt and pain in our lives because somebody that was a part of the church, because of something that we were doing, told us that we were unlovable to God, told us that we were rejected because of something that we were doing, that we were shunned, we were broken off. And let me just take you, I want you to hear me. I want you to hear me. I'm sorry. Because that's not what the Good Shepherd does for you. I'm sorry. If you've been hurt by that, you've been hurt because broken people hurt other people. But the Good Shepherd wants you to hear this so clearly. There is nothing you can do that makes you unlovable to the Good Shepherd. There is nothing you can do that makes you unlovable to the Good Shepherd. Jesus loves you just the way you are, but let me be also very clear, that is not the whole story. He loves you too much to leave you where you're at too. He loves you too much to leave you in your mess. And so I know Bruno Mars tells you you're perfect just the way you are. The Good Shepherd Bruno Mars is not the Good Shepherd. Bruno Mars would not lay his life down for you. The Good Shepherd does. And he tells you, I can't leave you the way you are because I know where you will lead yourself. And it's not to the purpose that you can have. It's not to the place that you can go. You get real purpose when you follow the real shepherd. That is the good news. And you may be thinking, Terry, you're telling me you just talk with God. Like you have a conversation with God. Yes. Yeah. I talk with him all the time. I've learned to celebrate God in the wins. I've learned to speak with him when I'm in the valley, when I'm in the low spots. I've learned to hang out with him and everything in between. I've learned that he is with me. I learned that he's got great plans for me. You know, the other thing I've learned, when he says something, I just try to do it. You know, we can overthink things, but I know what his voice sounds like. And so when he tells me to do something, I just try to do it. And I saw the blessing of doing this just the other day. you ever just get this thought that comes into your head and you're like, I know this isn't my thought. And mine was, I hadn't heard from one of my buddies that I play hockey with. His name's Big Tim. Hadn't heard from him, and it probably been a couple months. So I was thinking, man, it's just really weird that his name keeps popping into my head. And so I called up my buddy Big Tim. Actually, I sent him a text first. I said, hey, man, just checking in on you. What's going on? How you doing? And I get this text back. He says, I'm doing okay. Do you remember what I told you before, though? When a guy says that he is doing okay, he is most definitely not okay. And so Tim calls me, and he says, who am I kidding? He says, I'm not okay. I'm in a really bad place. Tim had come off a surgery. He had been in a car accident. He had come off a surgery. He had taken painkillers. And Tim had been clean for drugs for 14 years. And he just flushed it all down the toilet. And he went off to isolate and be by himself. And as he was camping, he walked to the edge of a cliff. And a voice told him to jump off it. And right around that same time, God told me to call him. That's just the beginning. So I talked to Tim, and he had to check himself into a rehab. And so he said, I'm going to be in a rehab for 2 weeks. But I said, great, I'm praying for you. Like, I'm talking to the Good Shepherd for you. I'm vouching for you. And I said, we're going to meet up when you get out. And so he gets out, and we set up our first meeting. And I think my buddy Tim thought that I was going to clobber him over all the stuff that he did wrong. But I didn't do that. I said, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to hear the shepherd's voice. We started just reading. We did 7 chapters a week. Because the Good Shepherd has never asked me to do something that I'm not capable of. He knows how to lead me and guide me. And so I wanted to tell him, we're going to read 7 chapters together. And we just started going through the Gospels. We just happened to start with John. And we started reading through it together. And I saw something change in him. He started to hear from God. He's like, I think I'm hearing God's voice. I said, I think you are. He started to experience joy. I saw a change in him. And he started opening up. He shared with me, he said, I'm having some real anger issues. I said, tell me more. So he told me he was driving back from Columbus to Erlanger, and this car cut him off. And he decided that he was going to reach into his center console in the car where he keeps a pistol, and he pulled it out the window and started firing it into the air. It's kind of funny to think back now. It was not funny in the moment. And I remember looking at Tim and saying, Tim, I feel like I'm hearing God's voice on this one that you shouldn't keep a pistol in your car anymore. Tim said, I'm also hearing that. And so as soon as he got home that day, he took a video that he sent me. He texted it to me. And I walked him, take that pistol. He carried it, and he locked it away in his house. I started to see him open up to the Good Shepherd, that he actually wanted the Good Shepherd not to have a little bit of him, but he said, you can have all of me, and he started doing things. We got to where we read through all of the Gospels, those biographies, and then there's a book called Acts that comes right after where it talks about the early church. And so we had literally this week, we had started reading through the first few chapters, and we're just listening for God's voice as we're going through it. He'll highlight things and we'll talk about it. And this week he looked at me. He said, Terry, it's time. I was thinking, time for what? Like, what time is it? He said, it's time for me to get baptized. And so I want you to know after this camp, one of the things that I couldn't be more excited. I said, you need to get your people, you need to get your family, and you're going to get it publicly display that the Good Shepherd loves you. He never gives up on you. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Here's what I want you to know. The world would look at my friend Big Tim, And it would have told him, you had your chance. You messed it up. You're not worthy of being redeemed. You made your best. You made your bed. You lie in it. But the Good Shepherd says, I died for you. You are that valuable to me that no matter what you've done or been, you can still follow me. What are you going to do with the invitation? What are you going to do about it? Because the shepherd's that good. I'm going to give us a minute to sit in his goodness. And so I asked Chris, I said, will you take us through that chorus of good plans? When we see the good plans, we're reminded there's a good shepherd. And I want you to sit in your chair. You want to have your eyes closed. You want to sit there, whatever you want to do. I want you to receive the good plans of a good shepherd. I want you to hear it. He's speaking to you. He's speaking all the time. I just want you to hear his voice right now.
He has good plans. He has good plans for me. So I will take heart in deserts and gardens. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. 'Cause I know my Father, I know my Father has. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. So I will take heart in deserts and gardens. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. 'Cause I know my Father, I know my Father.
He has good plans for you. He wants to speak life and purpose for you. And I know the question you might be thinking, Terry, can I trust him? I want you to know it's a really good question. And the thing I'll tell you right now, you can't afford not to trust him. You can't afford to put your life in the hands of somebody that's not worthy and capable to lead it. And so I want to ask you, which of these three things do you need to do? Do you need to learn how to hear his voice better? Do you need to give him access somewhere? Or do you just need to quit waiting and take action and follow him? Do you just need to say, I'm in? Do you just need to say, I'm ready? I love when Tim said, it's time. For some of us, it just might be time. And so I pray you be ready. He is speaking. He is always speaking. Hear it. Receive it. And follow him. God, I thank you. I thank you that of all the things that you could have sent, you sent me and you sent us a shepherd. You sent somebody with the strength and the power to get things done, but you also sent somebody with the humility and gentleness to love us right where we're at. God, thank you that you get us. Thank you that you have great plans for us. And God, one of the things that sheep can do is they can forget. But God, would you imprint it on our hearts? Would you remind us of your goodness? Would you show us your faithfulness? We thank you. In Jesus' name.